Jessica Crow. I am the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights. And I'm very excited to have Paula Anastasiade with me today. Hopefully I said that correctly, Paula. I've been following her on LinkedIn, which not in a creepy way, in a very, very interested in academic way, because she puts so much amazing content out there as it relates to leadership, change management. If you're not following her on LinkedIn, you need to learn. But today you're going to learn from her as well. I am so excited. She's an organizational change manager. She's a consultant. She's a trainer. She's based in Bucharest. Paula, tell us a little bit about yourself so everyone can learn a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and kind of how you got to where you are. And then I have some more questions for you, but first take it away with your background and your bio.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm really excited to be here with you. And it's a pleasure to exchange some thoughts about change management, which we're both very passionate about. My role in change management started quite unpredictably, as it happens with many of us in this field, this line of work. I was a lucky beneficiary of one of the most corrosive myths out there about change management. And that myth is that it's just communications and training.
Yep.
And that means that I essentially got hired to do my first change management gig, so to speak, because I had a background in communications. I was coming from the non-governmental sector. I had worked with associations in chambers of commerce, with executives, mostly with executives, and I had also had some experience with event management, running my own business for a short while. And so I was the lucky beneficiary of this myth, because if the manager of that team had been very in tune to change management, I probably wouldn't have received I wouldn't have been selected for the role.
Right.
And that's how it started. And so because I was responsible to co-lead a global the EMEA portion of a global project, I started asking around, what is change management? And no one was able to give me a compelling answer, aside from, it's just change management is comms and training, it's an umbrella term.
Right.
And I wasn't comfortable with that. I just felt there had to be more than that, because it didn't make sense to me. Why would we need to use a fancy term for something that already has an established name? Why do we need to call it something else?
Right.
Later on, I discovered that it's quite common for corporations to do that. But at the time, it just didn't make sense. And so that made me want to look for answers myself. And the more I studied on my own, the more I discovered that indeed, this is much more than just communications and training. I also discovered that there was a clear connection to my sociology studies, and that was very exciting to me. And so from there on, it's just been a continuous adventure of learning, discovering, exploring with people, designing with people, and really putting myself in the service of people who need to make a change. Because in organizations, most people don't make a change because they choose to, but because they are asked. And so I see it as my mission to make it easier for them to make this transition, because I know how stressful it can be, because there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress in our lives as it is. And if there's anything I can do to alleviate that in my small way, I don't hesitate to do that. And that's my mission.
I love that. That is really well said. And, that this comes up a lot in change management circles around the tension that we feel because there's a misconception about change management being comms and training. And then there's a whole other side to it that really takes a look at human behavior and emotions and those interpersonal relationships and understanding human well-being. So I love that you were able to bring your other background in sociology into the conversation, and it's really helped you become such a well-rounded thought leader, I would say, in this space. I know that you also recently did some research as it relates to change management education for leaders. Can you tell us a little bit more about, one, why you chose to pursue that research, and then a little bit about your findings?
Well, over the past 8 years of doing change management, of interacting with other practitioners, of learning most of the things that I now know through experience, not just, through formal studies and informal education, I've discovered that indeed we are very challenged overall when it comes to change leadership. And when I talk about change leadership, I don't mean change practitioners like you and me.
Right.
I'm talking about senior leaders in charge of organizations, senior leaders who are either in a position to decide that certain changes are to be made, or if they don't make the decision, they are involved in steering those projects, in sponsoring them.
Yep.
And the notion of change sponsorship is not well understood in my experience. And it turns out from research, other research, not the one that I did, but also conversations with other practitioners, that indeed it is the number one stumbling block when the leaders are not prepared for their role as sponsors. And by prepared, I mean one of two things. One is they don't know what that means. And the second, the other option is they might know what it means, but they just don't have the capacity to exercise, to exert that responsibility.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the issue of commitment and conviction. If leaders don't believe in the change that they are sponsoring, that they are leading, then we cannot expect people to be enthusiastic. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, because on the face of it, you could say, well, if you are leading a change, aren't you supposed to believe it by default? And yeah, it makes sense when you look at it that way. But let's think about how many sponsors we've worked with over the years who were voluntold to lead the project as sponsors. It wasn't because they had chosen to do that, or even if they had chosen to do that, there were perhaps other circumstances preventing them from really putting all their passion, all their faith into what they were doing. And that always shows. And so because these challenges are omnipresent, I would say, I started wondering at some point whether education has anything to do with that. I'm a great believer in education, and I thought that could be a starting point. The hypothesis I formulated in my mind was that one of the reasons why we don't see enough good change sponsorship is because the education that our leaders are receiving right now does not emphasize change management. Or perhaps it does, but marginally.
Limited, right.
And so I set out to understand the role of change management, but also digital transformation as as subjects on their own within the MBA, EMBA, and executive education offering of the world's top 100 business schools. And the specific things I was looking for are actually there were three main goals. The first goal was to understand whether change management and digital transformation even have a place in the curricula of these business schools. Again, these types of programs, MBAs, EMBAs, and executive education. The second thing that I wanted to look into was, are these topics in subjects included in the core curriculum, or are they offered as elective courses? And to me, that mattered because if something is part of the core curriculum, it means it's recognized as important.
Right.
And of course, as a change manager, I do believe that change management is essential and it should be part of the curriculum. But I wanted to understand if the world's top 100 business schools share the same perspective. The third thing I was interested in was understanding to what extent digital transformation courses include a change management component.
Right. Yeah.
And what I did was I analyzed 112 MBA programs because some of the world's business schools offer more than just one type of MBA. There were also 92 EMBA programs that I looked at, and 91 executive education offerings. And when I say executive education, I limited my search to open courses that are available to individual leaders, individual students, because business schools also offer custom-made executive education on request from various organizations.
Right.
But I was interested only in the open courses. The other reason for limiting my focus there is that if something is custom made, you will not likely find anything describing it on the website. Whereas with open courses, you do have a short description that gives you an idea about the course.
Right.
And what I found was that, first of all, very few schools offer change management as a core program. 9 programs out of 112, which is 8%. Only 8%. And there are 22% of MBA programs that include an elective change management course.
Got it. Okay.
So overall, most schools do not offer change management at all.
This is very interesting to me for 2 reasons. One, I have my MBA, and I got it years ago. There was no change management education, but now I'm an adjunct faculty member at a university here in Colorado, and I'm teaching about change management in a course called Leading Change for Transformation, but it's a master's program. It's an elective, and it's through their organizational leadership and human resources programs, which I'm excited that they have a space in place for it. But I am not quite sure if it's a part of their MBA program, which traditionally, when you're getting an MBA, your expectation out of that experience is you'll become a leader in an organization, an org leader, a change leader. And I think I would be curious to hear your thoughts on this. There's an assumption that what you're learning through your MBA essentially is change management. I've heard that from other folks who've gotten their MBAs at top tier business schools. Well, the classes you're taking around leadership, those are helping you understand how to lead change. And there's a distinction, as you know, but what other insights did you get from your study where you're finding very few MBA programs have it as core curriculum, some have it as electives? What do you think not to make assumptions, but what other conclusions can you draw from your study as it relates to maybe why or why not there's a lack of focused change management education within MBA programs?
I've been thinking about that as well, but on that point, I can only formulate a hypothesis.
Right.
In other words, I can only speculate, because the way a subject makes its way into the curriculum, whether as a core elective or a core or an elective course, depends on many variables. What I do know is that if a subject is included in the core curriculum, it means it's a recognition of the fact that it's important.
Yep.
And fortunately, there are a few schools that do recognize change management as important. 8%. It's not much, but it's still progress. It could have been 0.
Right.
So
that's true.
it's definitely better than nothing. Now, I find it interesting that the perception might be that by default, if you get an MBA education, then you are prepared to lead change. I would disagree with that, because if there's anything that I can say is a staple in MBA courses, aside from the fact that it's definitely not change management, that would be statistics, accounting, finance.
Right.
And these are obviously very important topics, but they have nothing to do with what it means to lead an organization and its people through changes, smaller or more complex.
Totally agree.
Then another thought I have is that, yes, many, if not most of these programs do offer, as part of the core curriculum, a course about organizations. and leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they are combined. But when you look at the description, which is very brief, by the way, you cannot get a very thorough understanding of what the course is about, but it still gives you an idea. It does not deal specifically with the challenges of organizational change. It does not talk about what it means to be a good sponsor of change. It
Right.
does not talk about what it means to be the manager of a team, maybe a middle manager, a frontline manager of a team that is going through change. It does not talk about who does what in change, what
Right.
roles are important in making change happen. It does not talk about what makes change happen.
Right.
On us, as a side note, even change management is not, in my opinion, covering all the topics that it should be covering. Because,
I
for
agree with
example,
you.
behavioral science has a lot to teach us.
Yep.
And I'm about to make what might be a controversial statement, but I would say that change management training suffers greatly from this lack of behavioral science.
I agree with you. Very
And
much
so,
so.
the standard change management training teaches change as a process. And as useful as it might be to have a standard approach, a method, a logical sequence of steps that you take in an order, that definitely does not give you the full picture of change. And it definitely does not tell you enough, or sometimes it does not tell you anything about how humans change their behavior.
Right. And it fully, yeah. And I'm thinking, there's a lot of, there's change management training out there where that is missing. And I have personally coached people who have gone through change management training programs and they still don't feel prepared or equipped because they have these tools, they have their process. But when you pressure test that in real life, where you're working with humans who are complex and often irrational, right? It's challenging to move forward with the process when you haven't figured out how to lead yourself, navigate your own emotions and behaviors, navigate the emotions of others. So I fully agree with you. What should change leaders be learning about? And is there a difference between what a change leader should be learning about versus a change manager? And how do those roles work together in an organization?
That's a great question. Actually, it's made up of several
Multiple
questions. So
questions, yeah.
let me try to take them in order. Some things that I think are very important for MBA students looking to become organizational leaders, MBA or EMBA students, for that matter. Three things. Change management is obviously one of them. That's, in my opinion, a mandatory topic, which is worth exploring as a standalone course, part of the core curriculum. And so are critical thinking and decision making. Critical thinking and decision making are two topics that are not part of change management. But through practice, I've discovered that the lack of critical thinking and the lack of problem solving and the lack of decision making skills will often impact change management. And
Yes.
that typically shows up in the myriad projects where it's unclear whether we are solving a problem through that project or we are taking something that is already there and making it better. Normally, a project should come into being because we are dealing with one of these two situations. And when I see how hard it is to understand, to get people thinking about the problem statement and what is our goal, what is the business value of what we are doing, what is our picture of success, what are we aiming for? These things seem basic, but they're not.
No.
I've also seen a lot of projects where, in a rush to meet a certain demand or to apply to put a certain idea into practice, very little time is paid to considering what the problem really is and what several potential options for solving it might be.
Right.
And so how many potential solutions were explored before engaging in this project? Often zero.
Very few. Yeah.
I mean, not zero, just one.
Right.
One that ended up being the solution. And so no wonder there's no business case in many of these projects.
Yeah.
Or if there is a business case, it's often not made available to people like us who actually need key information that is part of the business case or part of the business case, because it's considered sensitive information, things like cost and expected benefits, financial benefits.
Right.
And so these three things, in my opinion, really need to be taught in tandem. Fortunately, there are certain MBA programs that include critical thinking and decision-making, especially this decision-making in the core curriculum. So that is good news.
Yeah.
But like with change management, that is an exception.
Got it. I really okay, so your recommendations really resonate with me. And I think if we thought about adding those courses and that type of understanding and knowledge base to a change manager's knowledge toolkit, for example, it also would address some of the myth that you earlier referenced, right? Change management just being communications and training. I think that change managers often get pigeonholed into that space because they aren't tapping into their critical thinking and problem solving, or the organization's expectations are not that they do that. And that is absolutely a capability that someone who is leading a change, or, as the change leader and sponsor or the change manager, should be able to do within the context of that project or program. So that really resonates with me. What else? Well, I think the kind of the next set of that question was maybe the difference between.
What else do they need to learn?
Yeah.
So what else they need to learn? I would say digital transformation should be taught holistically. Right now, it seems like, from my research, that most schools look at digital transformation as merely something that has to do with technology. And there were two key themes that came up in this research. Digital transformation courses focus primarily on introducing students to a range of technologies at their disposal and discussing potential applications. So it's merely an introduction. It's merely creating awareness of what's out there. The second theme is building digital businesses, a digital strategy for our business in the interest of outcompeting others. So these are the only two aspects that are considered. Out of 112 MBA programs, there were only 3 programs that contain digital transformation as part of the core curriculum where change management elements were present. So only 3 out of 112. Wow. And only 1 out of 92 EMBA programs. So the vast majority, with the vast majority, you don't see any trace of change management. There's no conversation, apparently, judging from the information that's available on these websites. There's nothing about people. There's nothing about processes. There's nothing about organizational structure, organizational culture, organizational readiness. There's nothing about how we come to the conclusion that, yes, this is the solution that we need. There isn't even a clear understanding of what digital transformation is. And so these days you see this term thrown around a lot: transformation, business transformation, digital transformation. And there's very little clarity, I think, overall. And I see this getting echoed by other colleagues who are experts at digital transformation in specific fields. They see the same thing. And so the risk in that is that the term transformation gets devalued. Just because you're implementing ERP, for example, that doesn't automatically mean you are transforming your organization.
Right.
Just because you are introducing a new HR tool, a new HR platform, that does not mean you are transforming your business. And so we really need to start from the basics, understand that digital transformation is not simply a fancy term. It refers to a specific type of transformation where we are looking at how we create value as an organization, and some, in other words, the target operating model, and what we do to create that value, which is our business model.
Yep.
This is what transformation really means. And when we talk specifically about digital transformation, we talk about how we use technology to accomplish that.
Right.
Change our target operating model and sometimes even our business model. And from there on, we need to discuss all the elements that are included with through a holistic lens, not, piecemeal. We just talk about technology,
right.
But we're in the beginning, I think.
Yeah, no, but I think you've hit the tip of the iceberg here. And I would love to continue to see this conversation and your research around this space continue to grow, because I think you're on to something that I hope goes viral, where leaders are thinking about this and universities are thinking about this too, and maybe making their curriculum more robust so it actually meets the needs of the students who will then be the leaders in the organization. So one more question for you then, because we've talked about change leadership as sponsors, change management. Is there a difference between what change leaders, org leaders should be doing versus change managers, the dedicated practitioners to drive change, whether it's org change, digital transformations? What was your either hypothesis, or did your research kind of prove out to you as you went through this process?
That wasn't necessarily part of the research.
Okay.
That I just looked at the role of change management and digital transformation in the business education system.
Got it.
But when it comes to change leadership and change management, I see that this is a very trendy topic lately, and there are a lot of people with a lot of different opinions. My perspective on this is that if we try to import from the business field the decades-old conversation and debate around, is it better to be a change leader or a change manager, that is entirely misguided. I think such debate is misplaced in the arena of change management. And here's why. In business, a lot of the thinking and a lot of the conversations on this topic focus on what the same person should be. Is it preferable for a person to be more of a manager or a leader? With other questions being, can the same person play both roles? Is it more valuable to be a leader or a manager? What skills do you need to do both? And how do you choose whether in this particular situation you need to act more like a manager or a leader? In change management, as far as I can see, this type of debate is misplaced, because we are not talking about the same person potentially filling two different roles, but we are actually in effect talking about two different people. When I talk about change leadership, what I have in mind is not the leadership potential or the leadership skill set of someone like you and me, who is essentially in charge of creating change management strategies, plans, overseeing their implementation, diagnosing readiness, and interacting with the various stakeholders, running change impact assessments, and a lot of other things that we typically do.
Right.
When I say change leadership, I say change sponsorship,
right.
And I also say middle management or frontline management. These are two different types of leaders of change. On the one hand, we have the sponsors of change, typically senior leaders, depending on the complexity of the change and the scope and the mission. You often find C-level executives playing this role, as they should. especially for digital transformation, where the CEO should be the main sponsor of the change. And this role comes with its own set of responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have frontline or mid-level managers, whatever we want to call them. These are the managers of the teams that are expected to make the change happen, to actually change something about how they do their work or about how they interact. So this is a different category of change leadership. And then we can talk about change managers, and change management is a standard industry term. I'm not sure that that is, the best term for what we do, but for the time being, it is the official term. And and whenever I try to explain, whenever I train or coach executive leaders or other categories of leaders, I typically use the following analogy. A political campaign is something that we're all familiar with. And when in a political campaign, in an elections campaign, you have a candidate on stage, and that candidate is out to get the votes of the people in support for their program, whatever it is that they want to do. Quite interestingly, this year we've got elections in about 80 countries around the globe. So I think the analogy is really fitting in this particular context, in this time. But that candidate on stage is not alone. Backstage, you typically find a small or bigger army of people working for the campaign.
Right.
And one of those people is the campaign strategist. That person creates the strategy, creates the communications plan, looks out for potential issues, reasons to resist the change that the candidate is proposing, coming up with strategies and with ideas for how to overcome those barriers, all in the interest of getting the leader on stage elected.
Right.
And this is how I think about change leaders and change managers, respectively. Yeah. The primary sponsor of the change, let's imagine we are talking about an executive leader. That person is on stage, but the problem is they are often, because they don't often understand change management, which in part has to do with a lack of education or the absence of change management from business education. That person doesn't realize that even though they have been appointed by a board, people actually keep them there and vote for that person every day because they show up for work every day, they put in their best, and they don't essentially quit their job and go looking for other opportunities.
Right.
That is a clear sign that, I'm not voting for you anymore, and my frustration has got to a certain level where I cannot put up with this anymore, and I'll, just go find something better to do elsewhere.
Right.
Because they don't know that they need to get people to support the change, because you cannot just impose it on them. Or you can, but that always comes with consequences that as a leader you probably don't want, especially if
you become a dictator.
if you are not an, yeah, exactly. If you're not a dictator, you probably want to avoid going there.
Right.
So there are specific things that you need to do as a candidate, as a primary sponsor. You have to, first of all, set an example. You have to communicate consistently. You have to engage with people at all levels, not just with your leadership team.
Right.
You have to demonstrate skin in the game. It's not enough to just show up and announce that something is happening or is going to happen, and show up at the end and say, yeah, we made it happen. Yay, now let's get back to work. Things don't happen, don't work that way. So, and of course, if you don't show your investment, if you don't concretely demonstrate your skin in the game, your commitment, your enthusiasm, your genuine faith in the organization, in what is being done, in the change itself, if you don't inspire people through your own ethic, through the fact that you, for example, take part in training alongside people, or that you agree to abide by the same standards that you want to introduce for the rest of the organization. If you don't do any of that, then it's hardly likely for you to get elected.
That's right. Yeah. What a
And
great analogy of how to think about. Yeah, go ahead.
here comes the change manager, who, much like a strategist in a political campaign, um, is in charge, among other things, of creating your engagement plan, your engagement for the executive who's acting as a sponsor. They are able to tell you which events you might want to organize, where to go, where it's enough to just maybe phone a call, maybe make a phone call, sorry,
Yeah.
and when you should actually go there and get in direct contact, face to face with people, what you want to be saying, when you should be saying it, what exactly you should be doing, how you can demonstrate your commitment. Look, this, um, let's say, training program is coming up. It would be a good idea for you to show up. And if you're not going to be part of the training session, and at least be there, interact with
Get off.
people,
Yeah.
talk about why this is important, and then ask them how it was. What did they like about the training? Um, and most importantly, talk to them about what's blocking them. Because as much as we'd like to think that the solution lies in communicating and sending people to training, the blockers are often somewhere else. And this is where leaders need to look. What else? Maybe you went to training, maybe you understood what's expected, but maybe you're unable to do things in a new way because there's something else preventing you from doing that. And so, as a sponsor, as a team manager, but let's stick with a sponsor for now, you want to understand what the constraints are. You want to understand whether there's a disconnect between you and your organization, and between the leaders in your team, on your team, and the organization. One thing that I think is critical, and that most leaders that I have worked with had a hard time grasping, is that any change, whether it be something as small as a tool launch, whether that can hardly be qualified as small, or as complex as digital transformation, that is not an isolated event. You cannot look at that project and disconnect it from what came before it. Just as you cannot say that, this is what's happening here and we'll see about the future. No, what's happening here and the way that the change is getting managed here, and the way that you show up as a leader, the conviction you put in your attitude, in your actions, the enthusiasm, the involvement, the active involvement, not just, communicating, but actually, showing people that you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get
Right.
into the dirt with them. That's what will determine your future.
Right.
It's not like, oh, we've done this project, okay, we move on to the next thing and we forget that this ever happened. No, what happened now, what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas.
Right.
From this perspective.
Yeah, that's so great. I mean, the analogy is perfect. And the way that you've described the distinction between change leader being a sponsor, a middle manager, versus change manager as the practitioner, the campaign strategist, is so well said. And I hope that people who are listening and watching, that the light bulbs are turning on and they're thinking about their role as change leaders maybe differently, and what they need to do to help the organization change. And then change managers are thinking about the role they play and taking, everyone can take more responsibility and ownership for the very important roles they play in leading organizations, people, through change and digital transformations. Paula, this was an incredible conversation. I learned so much from you. I cannot wait to dig into your research even more and look forward to future research and content that you share in the many forums that you're active in. What is the best place for, is LinkedIn the best way to follow you, follow your research,
Yes.
learn from you? Okay, good. I'll make sure to @ you in the posts that I put on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you so much for being here today. Truly incredible conversation. I'm so grateful for the time, and wish you continued success with all of the great things that you're doing.
Same to you, and thank you again for having me. It was a great conversation for me as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Have a great week.
You too.